Maria wiped the sweat from her brow as she trudged across the small plot of land she now called home. The sun had barely risen, yet the day already felt heavy with the weight of her responsibilities. Since her husband's untimely death in a farming accident 2 years ago, Maria had carried the burden of raising 3 young children alone. Her farm, once tended by 2 strong hands, had dwindled to a meager source of sustenance. Crops grew sparsely, livestock numbers had diminished, and debts hung over her like a dark cloud. Each morning followed the same relentless routine. She rose before dawn, stoking the fire in the small, drafty cabin, making a thin porridge for the children, and then stepping into the cold, unforgiving world outside to work the land. She worked tirelessly, her hands calloused from planting, weeding, and harvesting. Yet she often found herself returning to the cabin with little more than empty stomachs and exhausted limbs. Despite the hardships, she carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to let despair show before her children. Her eldest, 12-year-old Samuel, tried to ease the burden where he could. He would fetch water from the well, gather firewood, and watch over his younger siblings while Maria worked in the fields. But he was only a child, and the worry etched into his young face betrayed the heavy responsibilities placed on his small shoulders. 7-year-old Lily spent her days tending to the few chickens they owned, collecting eggs, and helping with the garden. And little Jacob, barely 4, clung to Maria's skirts, a constant reminder of how fragile and fleeting their security had become. Though life was harsh, Maria's spirit remained unbroken. She often walked to the edge of their property, staring out at the horizon, and silently vowed that she would never let her children go hungry, no matter the cost. The local community, once bustling with neighbors who shared in each other's joys and burdens, had grown sparse. Many families had moved away, seeking more prosperous lands, leaving Maria and her children largely to their own devices. The isolation weighed heavily on her, but it also forged resilience. She knew that survival depended on resourcefulness and determination, qualities she had no choice but to embrace. Maria's nights were equally taxing. After tending to the children's needs, mending clothes, preparing a meager dinner, and telling bedtime stories, she would sit alone by the flickering candlelight, carefully calculating how to stretch every grain of rice, every piece of dried meat, and every egg she could muster. She worried constantly about the future, whether the crops would survive the coming winter, whether the children would stay healthy, and whether she could somehow carve out a better life for them in a world that seemed indifferent to their suffering. Yet, even in the darkest moments, Maria found glimmers of hope. The laughter of her children as they chased chickens in the yard, the small green shoots emerging from the soil, and the occasional kindness of a passing neighbor reminded her that life, though challenging, was not without its rewards. Each day she survived, she felt a quiet triumph, a reassurance that she could endure whatever hardships came her way. The story sets the stage by immersing readers in Maria's world, a life defined by loss, struggle, and unyielding responsibility. It highlights her courage and resourcefulness, painting a vivid picture of the dire circumstances she faces while also hinting at her inner strength and determination. The hardships of her daily life, the weight of her grief, and the unwavering love for her children establish Maria as a protagonist whose actions and choices will resonate deeply in the events to come. Her resilience and compassion are the seeds that will later drive the story forward, ultimately leading to the moment that changes her family's fate forever. The morning air was sharp and cold as Maria bundled her children in worn coats and scarves, preparing for the trek to the woods. Winter had arrived with an unrelenting bite, and the small pile of firewood near their cabin was nearly gone. Without it, the children would shiver through the nights, and the cabin would feel like a frozen shell. Maria tightened her grip on the youngest, Jacob's tiny hand, and steered them down the narrow, snow-covered path toward the woods that lay just beyond the outskirts of their farm. She carried a wicker basket for wood, while Samuel clutched a small hatchet, ready to chop fallen branches. The forest loomed ahead, its bare branches stark against the pale winter sky. Maria knew the woods well, having ventured there many times before to gather kindling or forage for edible roots. Yet today felt different. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the brittle limbs, and Maria felt an uneasy shiver that went beyond the cold. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself that fear could not deter her from her duty to her children. Survival required courage, and there was no room for hesitation. The children trudged behind her, their boots sinking into the fresh snow, leaving small footprints that would soon vanish in the winter wind. Maria scanned the woods carefully, aware of the hidden dangers that lurked among the trees' slippery patches of ice, thorny bushes, and the occasional wild animal searching for food. She reminded herself constantly to stay vigilant, both for her own sake and for the safety of her children. After a few hours of careful searching, they found several fallen branches suitable for kindling. Maria instructed Samuel to chop the wood into smaller pieces, while Lily gathered the branches into the basket. Jacob clutched her coat, shivering, but his eyes lit up when he spotted a rabbit darting through the snow. For a brief moment, the harshness of their environment seemed distant, replaced by the quiet wonder of the forest. It was then, quite unexpectedly, that Maria noticed a figure lying among the trees. At first, she thought it might be a log, but the way it shifted slightly in the wind told her otherwise. Her heart skipped a beat as she approached cautiously, brushing snow from the form to reveal a man, pale and unconscious, with blood matted on his clothes. He was dressed like a rancher, his hat lying a few feet away, his face streaked with frostbite and dirt. Maria quickly assessed him. He was alive, but barely. The cold had sapped his strength, and his breathing was shallow. Instinct overtook fear. She signaled for the children to stay back and gently lifted the man's shoulders, realizing immediately that they could not leave him there. Even though their resources were minimal, leaving a dying man in the snow was unthinkable. Maria gathered her courage, instructing Samuel to help her drag him to a sheltered spot near the edge of the forest where they could examine him further. The children followed, wide-eyed, sensing the seriousness of the situation but unsure of what to do. The journey back to their cabin was treacherous. Each step required careful navigation around icy patches and fallen branches. Maria's arms ached from holding the man's weight, and her children struggled to keep up, their small feet slipping in the snow. Yet she pressed on, her determination fueled by the knowledge that his life rested in their hands. Every shiver from the man, every shallow breath, reminded her that failure was not an option. By the time they reached the cabin, Maria's cheeks were flushed with cold and exertion. She laid the man gently on a pile of blankets, wrapping him as best she could. The children hovered nearby, unsure and anxious, but ready to help however they could. What had started as a routine task gathering firewood had turned into a perilous journey that tested their courage, resourcefulness, and compassion. In that moment, Maria realized that this encounter, as dangerous as it seemed, might also be the turning point in all of their lives. The cabin was small and drafty, its walls lined with the faint smell of wood smoke and lingering flour from days of meager cooking. Inside, Maria knelt beside the unconscious rancher, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the blankets around him. Her children watched, wide-eyed and anxious, unsure what to do. Samuel's small fingers twitched as if he wanted to help, and Lily clutched her doll as if it could somehow offer comfort. Jacob hid behind Maria's skirt, shivering from both the cold and the tension in the room. Maria knew immediately that they faced a critical choice. Leaving the man in the freezing snow would mean certain death, but taking him imposed risks as well. Their food supply was limited, their cabin cramped, and the children's health was already fragile. Could they afford to share what little they had with a stranger? She hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Then, looking at the man's pale, frostbitten face, she made her decision. Compassion outweighed fear. Survival could not exist without empathy. She turned to her children and spoke firmly but gently. "We're going to help him," she said. "He's hurt, and he needs us. I know we don't have much, but we must do what's right." The children, sensing the seriousness in her voice, nodded solemnly. Samuel stepped forward and helped Maria lift the rancher slightly, while Lily fetched more blankets from the cupboard. Jacob, though small, offered a corner of his favorite quilt, placing it over the man as if to shield him from the world. In that moment, the family's unity and courage shone through the fear that threatened to overwhelm them. Maria worked quickly to tend to his injuries as best she could. She washed the blood and dirt from his face using warm water she had heated over the stove, gently applying herbal poultices she had learned to make from her mother. Her hands were nimble despite the adrenaline and exhaustion, binding a makeshift bandage around a deep gash on his arm. She checked his breathing and pulse, murmuring reassurances even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "You'll be all right," she whispered, though the uncertainty gnawed at her heart. The children watched closely, absorbing her instructions and learning through action. Samuel was asked to fetch water and carry small pots of broth to the man, while Lily held the blanket snugly in place. Maria encouraged their participation, not only to help but to teach them resilience and responsibility in a world that often demanded more than they seemed capable of giving. Each act, however small, became a lesson in courage, empathy, and the profound power of human kindness. Hours passed. The man remained unconscious, but there were signs of life-weak groans and slight movements. Maria refused to rest. She knew that in situations like this, every moment mattered. She monitored his condition, adjusting blankets to keep him warm, feeding him small sips of water, and talking to him as if her words alone could give strength. It was exhausting, physically and emotionally. But she drew resolve from her unwavering commitment to her children, and her belief that doing the right thing could change everything. By evening, the rancher's breathing had steadied slightly. Maria finally allowed herself a brief moment to rest, leaning against the wall, her body aching, her hands raw from tending to him. She looked at her children and saw pride mirrored in their eyes. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and discomfort, yet they had chosen compassion over hesitation. In saving a stranger, they were discovering their own strength and humanity. This part of the story underscores the family's courage, resilience, and moral fortitude. The decision to help the rancher, despite limited resources and personal risk, becomes a defining moment for Maria and her children. It establishes the foundation for the transformative journey ahead, showing that acts of kindness, even in the direst circumstances, can spark profound change, not only in the lives of those they help but in their own lives as well. The first night in the cabin was long and tense. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the small windows, but inside, a fragile warmth had begun to form, not just from the fire Maria had managed to stoke, but from the presence of life they had chosen to protect. The rancher, still unconscious, lay wrapped in blankets on the floor, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Maria hovered nearby, her eyes flicking between the stove, the children, and the man they had rescued. Every groan he made drew a sharp intake of breath from her, but she refused to leave him, knowing that vigilance might make the difference between life and death. By morning, the rancher stirred slightly, his eyes opening to the dim light of the cabin. He was weak, barely able to lift his head, and his lips were pale. He looked around with confusion and fear, the harshness of the world outside mirrored in his gaze. Maria offered him a gentle smile, speaking softly to calm him. "You're safe now," she said. "You're in our home. We'll take care of you." Though he could not speak immediately, the faintest nod of recognition crossed his face. Days turned into weeks as Maria and her children devoted themselves to his recovery. Food was scarce, yet Maria made small, nutrient-rich meals from what little they had, encouraging him to eat despite his reluctance. Water was drawn from the well, herbs were brewed into soothing teas, and the fire was kept steady to stave off the relentless winter chill. Each day was a careful balance of nurturing his body and monitoring his fragile health. Maria improvised splints for his wounds and created poultices from local herbs to prevent infection. Her knowledge, though limited, became a lifeline for the injured man. The children took on roles that mirrored their mother's determination. Samuel, who had initially been hesitant, became her right hand, fetching water, chopping firewood, and learning the delicate task of applying bandages. Lily, gentle and patient, entertained the rancher with stories and songs, coaxing weak smiles from him when the cabin felt too quiet. Jacob, the youngest, would sit near his side, holding his hand and whispering simple words of encouragement. Though small, each child contributed meaningfully, and in doing so, they learned resilience, compassion, and the satisfaction of helping another human being in dire need. Gradually, trust began to form. The rancher, who had arrived in the woods battered and weary, started to speak softly, revealing fragments of his life. He was hesitant at first, speaking in short sentences and avoiding the details of his fall from fortune. But Maria's consistent care and the children's innocent companionship broke down the walls of suspicion and isolation he had carried for so long. He shared stories of ranch life, of cattle drives, and the harsh realities of working land in unforgiving conditions. In return, Maria shared the struggles of her own family, speaking candidly about loss, survival, and hope. The exchange, though cautious, planted the seeds of a deep bond between rescuer and rescued. Even as progress was made, challenges remained. The rancher was weak and sometimes frustrated by his dependence on others, while Maria constantly calculated how to ration their limited resources. Nights were sleepless, filled with worry and uncertainty, yet every small improvement in his condition became a victory worth celebrating. The family began to see him not only as someone in need of help, but as a teacher, whose knowledge and experience might one day transform their own lives. This phase of the story emphasizes growth, trust, and the development of relationships under pressure. Through the act of tending to the rancher, Maria and her children discover strengths they had not realized they possessed. The rancher, in turn, begins to understand the profound impact of kindness and human connection. These shared struggles create a bond that will later serve as the foundation for the transformation of all their lives, illustrating the idea that compassion and care can become a catalyst for change, even in the bleakest circumstances. As the days passed and the rancher regained strength, a quiet curiosity began to grow in the children. They watched him carefully, noticing the precision with which he handled chores, the way his eyes scanned the environment for hidden dangers, and the subtle authority in his movements. Maria observed this as well, realizing that the man they had saved was no ordinary wanderer. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, he finally began to speak of his past, his voice low and hesitant, as though each word carried the weight of old wounds. "I wasn't always like this," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. The children leaned in, eager yet respectful, sensing that the story held significance. "I had a ranch once. A big one. Cattle, fields, enough land to feed hundreds. I had people working for me. Life was different." His tone carried a mix of pride and sorrow, the memories bittersweet. Maria felt a shiver of awe and apprehension. This man, weakened and dependent now, had once commanded a life of wealth and influence, a world so distant from the struggle they had known daily. He went on, recounting a tale of prosperity turned to ruin. "I trusted the wrong people," he said quietly. "Partners who promised loyalty, friends who pretended to care. They left me with nothing. Land lost, livestock gone, debts mounting. I thought I could rebuild, but one accident after another kept me from recovering. And eventually, well, I ended up here." He gestured vaguely toward the woods outside. Alone, hurt, and with no one to help. Maria felt a pang of sympathy and understanding. Though their lives had been vastly different, both she and the rancher had experienced loss, betrayal, and hardship. She realized that his story mirrored, in some ways, the struggle she faced raising her children alone, trying to protect them from the harshness of a world that often seemed indifferent. Yet unlike her, he had once possessed great wealth and opportunity, only to have it stripped away by circumstances and the dishonesty of others. The children were fascinated. Samuel asked questions about the ranch, the cattle, and the work involved. Lily wondered aloud what it must have been like to live in a big house with so much land. Jacob, still too young to grasp the full implications, merely listened, wide-eyed, absorbing the tone and emotion in the man's voice. Each question the children asked allowed the rancher to relive moments of his past, both painful and joyful, and to begin healing from the isolation and betrayal that had left him broken as he shared his experiences. It became clear that he possessed not just knowledge of ranching and survival, but wisdom that could be invaluable to Maria and her family. He knew how to manage land, care for livestock, and make the most of limited resources. More importantly, he had endured hardships far greater than theirs, teaching lessons in resilience, patience, and judgment that could shape the family's future. Maria began to see him not only as someone they had rescued, but as a potential mentor, someone who could guide them toward a better life if they were willing to listen and learn. The revelations of his past also introduced a sense of hope and opportunity. While their own farm was small and struggling, the rancher's experience suggested that even in the face of great loss, recovery was possible. His story planted the idea that with knowledge, perseverance, and cooperation, their circumstances might not be permanent. It subtly shifted the family's perspective from survival alone to the possibility of transformation, laying the groundwork for the next stage of their journey. The story establishes the rancher's backstory, showing that beneath his weakened state lies a wealth of experience and wisdom. It highlights themes of trust, loss, resilience, and hope, while foreshadowing how his knowledge and guidance might later reshape the lives of Maria and her children. It is a turning point that transforms the rancher from a passive recipient of help into a potential agent of change, setting the stage for deeper bonds and the unfolding of their shared destiny. As the winter days slowly passed into early spring, the atmosphere in Maria's small cabin shifted. What had begun as a tense and desperate effort to save a dying man gradually transformed into a quiet rhythm of daily life, punctuated by laughter, shared chores, and the subtle beginnings of trust. The rancher, whom the children had begun to call John, became less of a mysterious stranger and more a part of their household. His initial wariness gave way to a tentative comfort, and in return, Maria and the children began to see him not just as someone they had rescued, but as a teacher, protector, and friend. The bond grew through the simplest of acts. Samuel learned to chop wood more efficiently, guided by John's steady hand and patient instructions. Lily discovered how to prepare herbal remedies that could soothe minor injuries, following John's advice on combining natural ingredients. Even little Jacob took pride in small tasks, like fetching water or carrying bundles of kindling, feeling a sense of purpose in helping someone he had come to care for. In these moments, the family discovered a new rhythm, working, learning, and supporting one another in ways that transcended necessity. John, for his part, began to open up, revealing more about himself in casual stories shared during quiet evenings by the fire. He spoke not only of ranch life but also of the principles he had learned in managing land, livestock, and people. "Patience is worth more than gold," he would say, or "you cannot rush the seasons. Everything comes in its own time." These lessons, simple yet profound, began to influence Maria's approach to her farm and to raising her children. Slowly, she found herself thinking beyond mere survival, envisioning a future where they might thrive rather than just endure. The children, too, grew attached to John. His presence filled the gaps left by their absent father, offering guidance, protection, and attention they had longed for. Samuel admired his strength and skill, often mimicking his movements when chopping wood or tending to small animals. Lily found in John a gentle mentor, someone who encouraged curiosity and nurtured her creativity through stories and practical lessons. Jacob, still too young to fully understand the complexity of relationships, sensed the kindness and safety John provided, often resting against him during storms or sharing quiet moments of laughter at his soft jokes through shared meals, chores, and storytelling. Mutual respect and affection blossomed. John admired Maria's unwavering dedication and ingenuity, recognizing the remarkable strength required to survive and care for children under such difficult circumstances. Maria, in turn, appreciated his wisdom, patience, and quiet guidance, learning to trust him not only with the daily workings of the farm, but also with the emotional well-being of her children. Their interactions were marked by a balance of authority and humility, a recognition that each had something to offer the other. Even in the presence of this growing bond, challenges remained. John's injuries had left him physically weaker than before, and the family's resources were still limited. But together, they began to tackle small projects, repairing the roof, fortifying fences, and planning for the next planting season. Each task, no matter how mundane, became a shared victory that strengthened their connection and demonstrated the power of collaboration. By the end of this period, it was clear that the family dynamic had fundamentally shifted. What began as a desperate act of compassion had evolved into a relationship rooted in trust, learning, and mutual respect. John was no longer a passive recipient of care but an active contributor to the family's survival and emotional growth. Maria's children were no longer isolated in their hardship but were discovering resilience, skill, and confidence under his guidance. The story emphasizes the gradual deepening of trust and affection, showing how adversity can forge strong, meaningful bonds. It underscores themes of mentorship, shared responsibility, and the transformative power of human connection, setting the stage for future challenges where these bonds will be tested and ultimately prove crucial to the family's survival and success. Just as spring began to hint at new life in the woods surrounding Maria's farm, the fragile stability of their household faced its first serious threat. Word of the injured rancher's presence had begun to spread. It started as whispers in the small town, fueled by curiosity and in some greed. The few neighbors who remained watched from a distance, and it wasn't long before John's former associates, those who had betrayed him and helped, strip him of his land-caught wind of his location. Their motives were clear. They wanted to reclaim what they believed still belonged to them, and they were willing to use intimidation or force to do so. Maria sensed the change in the air before any confrontation occurred. The once quiet forest paths now carried the distant sound of unfamiliar horses and voices, and the children noticed the increased tension in her demeanor. Samuel clutched his hatchet a little tighter, Lily kept a closer eye on the boundaries of their property, and Jacob followed his mother's every movement, sensing that danger had arrived. Maria realized that their small acts of kindness saving John's life had inadvertently brought them into the orbit of people who saw only opportunity for exploitation. One afternoon, a group of rough men appeared at the edge of their property. They demanded to see John and insinuated that he had no claim to anything. Their threats were sharp, their language cruel, and their intent clear. Maria stood her ground, shielding her children while asserting her authority, refusing to let fear dictate her actions. John, though weakened by his injuries, stepped forward with measured calm, asserting that he was under their protection and that any attempt to harm the family would be met with resistance. The situation forced Maria and her children to rise to the challenge. Samuel learned to use his hatchet not just as a tool but as a means of defense, while Lily and Jacob helped secure the cabin, locking doors and moving essentials to safe spots. Maria coordinated their efforts with surprising clarity, organizing them to act as a unit. She realized that survival now required not only compassion but vigilance, courage, and strategy. Each obstacle became a test of their resolve, forcing them to rely on one another in ways they had never before imagined. John also played a pivotal role. He shared his knowledge of defending property and anticipating the moves of those who sought to exploit weaknesses. He taught Samuel how to recognize patterns in human behavior, how to create simple but effective alarms using ropes and bells, and how to move quietly through the woods in case they needed to hide or escape. His guidance transformed the children's fear into confidence and purpose, reinforcing the bond that had been growing steadily over the previous months. Over time, these threats became more than physical challenges. They also tested the family's moral and emotional resilience. They faced decisions that required judgment, courage, and sometimes restraint, balancing the need to protect themselves with their desire to remain compassionate and just. Maria struggled with the knowledge that, despite her best efforts, her children were now exposed to danger simply because of the life they had saved. Yet she also recognized that these trials were shaping them into stronger, more capable individuals, prepared to face the unpredictability of life with courage and wisdom. The external pressures strengthened the family's unity. Moments of tension were interspersed with quiet victories, successfully warding off intruders, safeguarding the farm, and keeping the children safe. Each challenge reinforced the lessons John had begun to teach and validated Maria's insistence on courage and morality as guiding principles. Through these obstacles, the family discovered that resilience, strategic thinking, and trust in one another were just as vital as compassion in navigating the harsh realities of their world. The story emphasizes tension, danger, and growth under pressure. It highlights the importance of resourcefulness, courage, and the lessons learned from past experience. The family's bond, now tested by external threats, becomes more solid, proving that adversity, while dangerous, can also serve as a catalyst for growth and prepare them for the even greater transformations that lie ahead. After weeks of tension and unease, Maria, John, and the children began to take control of their circumstances rather than simply reacting to threats. The early lessons in survival, defense, and resilience had prepared them for this moment. No longer were they merely trying to keep the farm and the rancher safe. They were ready to actively reclaim what they could of their lives, to turn adversity into opportunity. This shift marked the beginning of a transformative period for the family. John's guidance became increasingly practical. He taught Maria and Samuel how to maximize their small plot of land, using careful crop rotation and sustainable soil management techniques that ensured better yields. He showed them how to identify the most valuable plants and livestock for survival and trade, emphasizing efficiency and foresight. With his help, even Lily and little Jacob found meaningful ways to contribute. Lily tended small herb gardens and chickens, while Jacob learned to gather firewood and small crops under careful supervision. Every family member had a role, and each task reinforced a sense of purpose and capability. Together, They began repairing and fortifying their home and the surrounding property. Broken fences were mended, the roof reinforced against spring storms, and rudimentary traps and alarms were set to alert them of intruders. John's knowledge of the land, combined with Maria's determination and the children's enthusiasm, transformed the once vulnerable cabin into a fortified, functional homestead. The family's confidence grew with each small victory, proving that preparation, planning, and cooperation could overcome the fear that had dominated their lives. The next stage involved more ambitious undertakings. John proposed reaching out to nearby neighbors to form alliances and mutually beneficial arrangements for trade and protection. At first, Maria hesitated. Past experiences with betrayal made her wary of others' intentions. But with John's encouragement, she realized that collaboration could be the key to long-term stability. Carefully, they built relationships based on trust, exchanging surplus firewood and eggs for flour, tools, and advice. Slowly, the community began to recognize Maria and her children not as struggling survivors but as capable, resourceful contributors. Even as they strengthened their defenses and cultivated their farm, Maria, John, and the children were working to reclaim John's legacy. John began to make plans to reconnect with his remaining assets, tracking old agreements, land deeds, and livestock. The process was painstaking and required patience, negotiation, and strategic thinking. But with the family's support, he began to recover small parts of what had been lost. For Maria and her children, this process was more than material gain. It was a tangible lesson in resilience, the importance of knowledge, and the rewards of persistence in the face of adversity. Through this period, the emotional growth of the family was as significant as the material progress. The children's confidence flourished. They were no longer passive participants in survival but active decision-makers. Samuel showed leadership skills, Lily demonstrated ingenuity in resource management, and even young Jacob exhibited curiosity and determination. Maria, once burdened by fear and scarcity, began to feel empowered, recognizing that her actions, combined with trust in John and the children, could actively shape their destiny. By the end of this stage, the family had not only secured their immediate survival, but had also begun reclaiming agency over their lives. Threats and obstacles remained, but the sense of helplessness had been replaced by a growing mastery of circumstance. They had turned their home from a vulnerable cabin into a thriving homestead, established a network of allies, and set in motion plans for longer-term stability and prosperity. The story highlights transformation and empowerment. It demonstrates how skill, knowledge, and collaboration allow individuals to shift from survival mode to proactive problem-solving. The family's resilience, courage, and shared effort turn adversity into opportunity, setting the stage for eventual success, growth, and the realization that their lives and their futures can indeed be changed forever. By the time late spring arrived, Maria and her children had undergone a profound transformation, both individually and as a family unit. The once struggling widow now carried herself with quiet confidence, her hands no longer trembling with fear or uncertainty. The small, drafty cabin had evolved into a well-maintained homestead, complete with repaired fences, a thriving garden, and healthy livestock. What had once been a symbol of scarcity and struggle had become a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of collaboration. John's presence had been instrumental in this transformation. His guidance in land management, livestock care, and survival skills had provided the family with tools to not only survive but thrive. With his mentorship, Maria began experimenting with new planting methods, learning to read the soil and weather patterns, and strategizing to maximize yield. She applied John's lessons to her own understanding, making decisions that reflected both wisdom and practical experience. The farm, which had barely produced enough to sustain them in the past, was now yielding surplus crops and eggs, enough to trade with neighbors and secure additional supplies for the household. The children, too, had changed remarkably. Samuel had grown into a capable young man, confident in his ability to manage responsibilities and make critical decisions. He could now oversee parts of the farm independently, helping to plan planting schedules and tending to livestock with skill and care. Lily had developed a keen eye for detail and a gentle, steady hand, managing small livestock, tending herbs, and ensuring the household's needs were met. Jacob, though still young, showed curiosity, enthusiasm, and resilience that hinted at the promise of his future. Together, they formed a cohesive team, each contributing to the family's success and learning invaluable lessons about responsibility, cooperation, and perseverance. John, whose physical recovery had progressed steadily, was no longer merely the recipient of care but an integral part of the family's success. He began reclaiming parts of his former life, reconnecting with old acquaintances, reclaiming some of his lost land, and carefully negotiating the return of livestock and property. Yet his priorities had shifted. He valued the family's well-being above all else. He taught Maria and the children not only how to manage property, but also the principles of leadership, honesty, and resilience, preparing them to sustain their newfound stability long after he was gone. Emotionally, the family had grown stronger and closer. The hardships they had faced together, saving John, defending the farm, and rebuilding their home, had forged unbreakable bonds. Maria's love for her children deepened as she witnessed their courage and growth, while John became a father figure, a mentor, and a trusted companion. Trust and mutual respect replaced uncertainty, and laughter once again filled the cabin. The emotional weight of past struggles had given way to hope, pride, and a profound sense of accomplishment. The broader community began to recognize their transformation as well. Neighbors who had once regarded Maria's family as struggling and isolated now sought their advice and collaboration. Maria and John's combined knowledge and experience turned them into valued members of the local network, capable of guiding others and contributing to the prosperity of the area. Their story became one of inspiration, demonstrating how resilience, compassion, and determination could overcome even the harshest circumstances. By this stage, the family's success was not measured merely in material terms, but in their growth, unity, and hope for the future. They had turned survival into thriving, scarcity into abundance, and isolation into connection. Every challenge they had faced, from the frozen woods to external threats, had contributed to their evolution, shaping them into stronger, wiser, and more compassionate individuals. The emphasizes the culmination of the family's journey towards stability and fulfillment. It showcases not only material recovery but emotional and relational growth, highlighting themes of resilience, mentorship, and the transformative power of kindness and collaboration. The struggles of the past had paved the way for a future filled with opportunity, security, and hope. Spring had fully taken hold of the land surrounding Maria's homestead. The once barren fields were now rich with green shoots, vibrant flowers, and rows of thriving crops. Chickens clucked contentedly in the yard, and the livestock grazed on fertile pastures that had been carefully restored under John's guidance. The cabin, once a modest and vulnerable shelter, had become a warm, well-kept home filled with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and the quiet hum of productivity. For Maria and her children, life had shifted in ways they could scarcely have imagined when the winter had brought a dying man to their doorstep. John, fully recovered and now a respected presence in both the household and the surrounding community, had become more than a mentor. He had become family. His influence was evident in every aspect of their lives. the improved efficiency of the farm, the confidence in the children's abilities, and the sense of unity that bound the family together. Where once fear and uncertainty had ruled, hope and purpose now guided their days. Maria, who had borne the weight of her family's survival alone, now had a partner in resilience, someone whose wisdom complemented her courage and determination that the children flourished in this new environment. Samuel, once burdened by the responsibility of helping his mother survive, had grown into a capable young man able to manage portions of the farm independently. His leadership and practical skills reflected the lessons John had taught him, coupled with his mother's unwavering example of diligence and care. Lily's gentle, nurturing nature had been strengthened by her responsibilities, making her both resourceful and compassionate. Jacob, still young, had developed resilience and confidence, learning from the example set by his mother, siblings, and John. Together, they had transformed from a struggling, isolated family into a team of capable, self-reliant individuals, united by shared trials and triumphs. Beyond the farm, the family's reputation had grown. Neighbors and townspeople came to respect their resourcefulness, courage, and kindness. Maria, once an overlooked widow struggling to survive, was now seen as a capable leader, managing both the farm and her household with intelligence and heart. John's return to some of his previous holdings had not only secured financial stability, but also positioned the family as part of a larger, interconnected community. What had begun as an act of compassion saving a man in the snow had blossomed into opportunities for growth, influence, and connection that none of them could have foreseen. The emotional resolution was perhaps the most profound change. The family's journey had not been without fear, pain, or uncertainty, but it had instilled in them a sense of trust, belonging, and hope. Maria no longer faced the world alone, and her children had role models and a mentor to guide them. The bond they shared with John was a testament to the transformative power of compassion, showing that acts of selflessness can ripple outward in ways that change lives permanently. Together, they celebrated victories small and large, a bountiful harvest, a repaired barn, a neighbor's smile of recognition, or a child's newfound skill. Each success reinforced the knowledge that their lives had been irrevocably changed for the better. Looking back on the past months, Maria could scarcely believe how far they had come. The decision to help a dying stranger had set in motion a chain of events that reshaped their future. She understood, now more than ever, that courage, empathy, and persistence were not just virtues, they were tools for transformation. John's presence had not only saved them, but taught them the value of mentorship, trust, and cooperation. Together, they had built not just a thriving farm, but a new life, one filled with stability, love, and hope that concludes the story by emphasizing permanence and growth. The family's struggles had given way to prosperity, unity, and resilience. Their lives had been irrevocably changed by the simple act of kindness, proving that compassion and courage can create a ripple effect powerful enough to reshape destiny. Maria, her children, and John now faced the future together, confident that no challenge could break the strength they had forged through shared trials and unwavering trust. Their story ended not just with survival, but with a lasting transformation, proof that selfless acts can lead to extraordinary outcomes.